initiated through the uh, idea of Helga Sepp LaRouche, involves organizations from all over the world. It involves all sorts of people who have joined together for the purpose of trying to make sure that there's still a world here. Week after week, as it's turned out, we've had to do this. We had a conference which was done by the Schiller Institute last week, um, called In the Spirit of Schiller and Beethoven, All Men Become Brethren. And just on the first panel of that conference, we had representatives from Germany, Russia, China, Slovakia, Guyana, the United States, and Iran who spoke. And what's important, I think, to say about the nature of what this conference and this symposium process is about is having a circumstance in which the human race is represented on it, and the solution that we're proposing in various of its aspects is one which is for the human race as a whole. That's the conception and that's the idea. We have today speakers, in particular one that may have certain scheduling constraints. We want to therefore make sure we get started right away. And we open, as we always do, with our first statement by the founder of the Schiller Institute and the inspiration for this set of meetings, Helga Sepp LaRouche. So, Helga, please go right ahead.
Thank you. Good day to all of you. We are presently facing a seismic change in the strategic situation. And while it will not be ended on the 20th of January, nevertheless, that is a turning point for the very simple reason that in all likelihood, President Trump will get into the White House, and the present establishments are quite hysterical about trying to shift the balance of power ahead of time in such a way that even him being in the White House doesn't make a difference. They call that making NATO Trump steady, Trump ready, Trump secure, whatever. And we have seen in the recent period all over the globe efforts to favor the pro-NATO forces against the supposedly pro-BRICS forces. This was the case in South Korea recently, in Bangladesh, where regime change was affected. It's definitely big time in the Middle East, but also in Romania, in Georgia. So what we see right now is an unprecedented power struggle. Now, in my mind, the most acute danger to the existence of civilization still comes from the Ukraine situation, because what we see there is an absolute unwillingness by the forces in the West to read the signals, and more than signals, quite emphatic open language coming from Russia about red lines and the illusion, or maybe not illusion, but maybe willing to take into account the consequences, meaning even a nuclear war on the side of the West, seems to be foregoing. Just look at the recent developments. End of September, Putin announced the change in the nuclear doctrine, saying that they would from now on even consider an attack from a non-nuclear country, which is backed by a nuclear country, as the signal which would allow them to use nuclear weapons. Then on the 17th of November, President Biden allowed Ukraine to use the ATACMS for strikes deep into the territory of Russia. 2 days later, these ATACMS were used by Ukraine for attacks into Russia. 1 day later, on the 20th of November, Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan, director of the STRATCOM, therefore the Strategic Nuclear Weapons of the United States, made an unbelievable speech in a meeting of the CSIS think tank in Washington, whereby he said that the United States would, take the right to use preemptively nuclear weapons if the hegemony of the United States was at risk. The only problem was that one had to make sure to keep enough nuclear weapons that even after such a nuclear exchange, future adversaries could be deterred. Now, that statement, in my view, is so unbelievable. And what's even more incredible is that so far only a tiny paper in Maine in the United States has commented on it, but all the strategic think tanks and politicians and mainstream media have not even spoken about that. And what we are trying to do with our conference of this past weekend is to cause a reaction to that, because this really puts the question on, is a preventive nuclear war allowed to keep the world leadership role of the United States? And everybody would be quiet about that. So then one day later, on the 21st, basically the Russians used for the first time the Oreshnik. This is a new medium-range hypersonic missile which can fly at almost Mach 11. It's non-nuclear, therefore it does not, go into the question of legality, but it according to present legislation, whatever that is worth, it can be used. And however, it was a powerful demonstration that Russia, with these missiles, can reach every part of Europe, and there is no defense against it. Now, naturally, the impact of such missiles, given the fact that it has only kinetic energy, is not comparable to nuclear energy. But, if the Americans say that the US medium-range missiles, which they put into Germany from 26 on, at least that's their intent, will be non-nuclear, they could be nuclear armed. Well, if Putin says the Oreshnik will not be nuclear, well, then that keeps the question of, trust. And that is a very rare commodity these days. So, we are in a situation where a new strategic situation exists. Again, no discussion about strategy and the changes in the West. And for about two weeks from NATO came nothing big, but yesterday or 2 days ago, again, 6 ATACMS were fired into the Russian territory. All of them were intercepted. In any case, we are in a so dangerous situation that I can only say anybody who is not a complete moron is sleepless these nights. Then naturally the other dramatic shift came in Southwest Asia, where the incredible event happened that within a matter of only 11 days, the entire country of Syria just collapsed, disintegrated. Well, it did not disintegrate, but the HTS jihadist organization was able in 11 days to basically move through against the Syrian army of 270,000 people without any significant combat. Now, Assad, in the meantime, with his family, left for Moscow, and a transition of some sort is taking place. And actually, the Western media and Western politicians are all jubilant, saying, "Oh, finally this dictator Assad is gone. Finally, there is freedom and whatnot in Syria." Chess Freeman proved some humor by saying that the new head, Julani, is a liberal democratic jihadist. Draw your own conclusion. Now, we have to see what happens. A lot is going on. In the meantime, Israel has been basically achieved air superiority over all of Syria. Turkey has carved out a piece of Syria. Israel has carved out an area, and naturally the US is maintaining what they had before. So Syria is gravely diminished already. And the question is, why did all of this happen? Now, one has to take the look back, and the time now is too short for me to go into this extensively. But we should remember that Syria was a very prospering, very modern country, a functioning ecumenical cooperation among all the different religions. Women could wear Western dresses as they pleased. But then after the so-called Arab Spring started to destabilize many of the Arab countries, and it is always said now in the Western media that the dictator Assad brutally, went into a civil war against his own population. Now, we remember, because we were on the scene, that it was a large number of jihadist mercenaries of all kinds coming from Benghazi, from the Libyan destabilization via Turkey into Syria at the time, bringing large amounts of weapons. So it was not exactly a popular uprising, but it was a stirred uprising. And even General Flynn in 2012 went to Obama in the White House and told him that the United States was backing all the wrong forces, namely Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and many other, spin-offs of that organization, which Obama didn't want to hear. So, one needs to look at that all genealogy to come to a conclusion, and the dust has not completely settled what happened. But obviously, this means what will happen now to the Palestinians? What will happen to Gaza? It's, in one sense, it's a short-term absolute tragedy, because who will now protect the Palestinians? What about the prospect of a two-state solution? Is that out of the window for sure? All of these questions remain, including what will the future administration do in respect to Iran. We know that that is a big issue in Trump's mind, or at least it has been in his first administration, and that also involves incredible dangers. But if one looks at the longer arc of history, well, I think that the dynamic whereby the BRICS countries, the global south, have steadily gained because they are trying to build a system on a completely different set of axioms. And the reason why this has happened is because it's a blowback against the policies coming from basically NATO-related countries who foolishly celebrated their victory over the Soviet Union at the end of the Cold War and proceeded to establish a unipolar world based on the idea of Fukuyama's end of history, meaning that they could export liberal democratic values into all countries in the world, which did not go so well because these countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America just don't want this kind of neoliberal values and everything which goes with it. So they started to have a counter reaction against it. So will this play out now in the short term to lead to a nuclear war and the extinction of everybody? Or is the larger trend of history not rather one in the direction of a harmonious cooperation among all countries? And we should remember that anytime somebody tried to conquer Russia, by using first Napoleonic fantasies, then the fantasies of Hitler, and naturally always the grand game of the British geopolitical forces. Well, I think if we can avoid the short-term nuclear extinction of the human species, I think we can nevertheless, despite this immediate, incredibly dire situation for the Middle East, we can be hopeful that the forces of constructing and building will in the end be stronger. So I think we should discuss all of that, and I'm welcoming the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Helga. Now we're trying to get Vanessa Beeley on, who is to be our next speaker, but I understand she's having some Wi-Fi problems, and therefore we're going to connect her in as soon as her connection becomes clear. And what we'll do is we'll go to Ray McGovern, who, for those who don't know him, is 27 years Central Intelligence Agency, used to brief President Reagan and other presidents, but also won't mind if Vanessa gets on and we've got to interrupt him. Ray is that fluid, having had to deal with many circumstances over his long and storied career. So, Ray, we're happy you were here. We're happy you're so accommodating, and we're happy about your ability to clarify things when other people wish to muddy the waters. So, okay, good. You're unmuted. Great. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Dennis. I don't know how storied my career has been, but I'm happy to be with you for the 80th session of this wonderful group. The only group of its kind that's doing this kind of work, which is so necessary today. I don't mind being interrupted by the excellent Vanessa Beeley at any time, especially since she will have the latest on Syria. And there is none better than Vanessa in terms of analyzing those events. Well, what can I say? Well, we need some good news first, right? Before the bad news. The good news is that Trump has criticized bitterly what Biden, or let's call it the collective Biden, because I don't know who's really giving these orders. I rather think it's Blinken and Sullivan. The collective Biden is running these new policies, and Trump is very decidedly said this is crazy. What did he say here? It's not just crazy. He said, "I disagree very vehemently," says Trump, "with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia." He told that to Time magazine. "Why are we doing that?" says Trump. "We're just escalating this war, making it worse. They should not have allowed this to be done." Now they're doing not only missiles, but they're doing other types of weapons. And I think it's a very big mistake, end quote. Now, I don't agree with President-elect Trump on a lot of things, but he's certainly quite right about this. So this is a silver lining if we can make it through the next 5 or 6 weeks, folks. And I think we can. The other news just in, Russia launches massive attack, get this, folks, on Ukraine. Now, Putin has made it clear publicly that the retaliation for the nonce is going to be on Ukraine. They're firing the missiles. Yeah, they're enabled by the US and the UK and France, and God help us, not Germany yet. But the retaliation is going to be against Ukraine. And Zelensky is complaining this morning, this just in on CBS News, that there was a massive missile and drone attack, one of the heaviest bombardments since the Russian invasion. The Russian says that it was a retaliation for a Ukrainian strike on Taganrog, the airbase well within Russia, not in Kursk, but in the Rostov, I believe, oblast. So what we got here is no mention of the Oreshnik. Now, why no mention of the Oreshnik? It wasn't used this time, apparently. This is the early press reports. But what about the Oreshnik? You know, is the Oreshnik a game changer? Does it put the West at stalemate, or is the West checked by this new strategic weapon? Even Putin admits that this is a strategic weapon because he's assigned it to the Strategic Rocket Forces. He says it's not nuclear; it has a nuclear capability. Now, what it did in Dnipro, as as was just mentioned, as Helga just mentioned, on the 21st of November, was pulverized the place. In other words, there was no radiation. We could be thankful for that. What it did was turn this site into vapor. It vaporized it, okay? What was left wasn't a lot of damage left because most of it was just dust, you know? Remember, man, you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. Well, that's what happened to this great big factory in Dnipro, right in the middle of Ukraine. Now, there's some dispute, and this is important. There's some dispute between U.S. officials who say, a game changer? No, not a game changer. It's just another weapon, and we can proceed merrily on our way, and that's what we're doing. As Helga mentioned, the president himself on Friday the 13th, well, today's Friday the 13th too, isn't it? Yeah. Friday the 13th September, Biden was persuaded by our military not to allow these weapons that need U.S. and U.K. permission and technology to get to target, not them. He told the British Prime Minister who was visiting Washington that day on Friday the 13th, no, my military says we're not going to approve that. Well, he didn't say my military says, but that's exactly what happened. It's openly acknowledged. So what changed his mind? I guess the collective Biden changed his mind. These people are desperate. And how do the Russians read this? Now, the experts whom I trust, and it's helpful to have been around a while, okay, and you know who to trust and who not to trust on technical expertise. People to trust like Ted Postal or Steve, what's his name? Anyhow, the people who I trust tell me that the Oreshnik is a game changer. But this is a matter of perceptions, folks. If the U.S. makes it known, belittles this, and says it's not a game changer, this is important because the Russian perception of what the U.S. perceives is going to inform the Russian decision as to what to do next. In other words, it's a game of perceptions. The Russians think that this is a game changer. They have to take the U.S. at its word and say, no, it's not a game changer. And so are you going to see more Oreshniks? I think we will. But I think that in view of the fact we have only 5 or 6 weeks before Trump comes in, that there's a good chance that the Russians will be satisfied with doing what they did just now, and that is apparently they were bombing the hell out of the electrical system in Ukraine. There's lots they can do in Ukraine before they start risking a wider war, which some people in Washington would very much like to see happen. So the Russians are looking at a divided collective Biden. To the degree that the military has input here, they're going to be a cautionary force. But it's clear that the military was overruled 2 months after it was conceded that this was a really stupid thing to authorize longer range missiles into Russia proper. Now, vaporized. I wrote that down because I just got that from one of my best advisors. Back and forth between various people in the collective Biden. That's important because the Russians are looking on and say, okay, when's it going to be back? And when's it going to be fourth? Meanwhile, we will pulverize. Pulverize is a good word for the Oreshnik missile. It is a game changer. It's checkmate. You know, if you know chess, the U.S. should, as chess etiquette requires, should back away and say, doesn't have to say, okay, you won, just get out of the game, okay? But it's not going to do that. So the next six weeks are really important. What else? Well, while we're waiting for Vanessa, she's not ready yet, is she, Dennis?
No, we don't have her yet. Go ahead.
Okay. You know, I think it's really, really important for Americans to know that Vladimir Putin started warning that this kind of situation would be required for Russia to do if the U.S. didn't start widening NATO, if it didn't stop threatening Russia with all manner of infringements, particularly in Ukraine. The first notable time he did that was 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. What I have here, and what we can play for a few minutes until Vanessa comes up, is a video that Putin that I learned about in 2016. I was in Russia at the time, but I didn't know about this video. What happened was during an economic summit in Leningrad, in St. Petersburg, Putin got together some Western journalists, okay? Now, they were up there to cover the summit. It was after the summit. He gathered them around this room. There were about 20 of them, 10 at the table, 10 in the back. And he said, look, well, let me not put words in his mouth. Dennis, do we have that video? If so,
yes.
All right, let me just say one more word to introduce it. Putin is laying out what Russia was compelled to do, given the fact that the U.S. wouldn't listen, and given the fact that they lied to us, they deceived us, okay, by saying, "Oh, these are ABM sites, and they're only going to strike down big missiles from Iran." Well, that turned out not to be the case at all. That's about enough for introduction. Suffice it to say that for many of you, for most of you, this will be the first time you saw that, and that's explained by the first words of Putin, who says, "Now, I don't expect you to, I mean, you're journalists, I know, but you're Western journalists, so I'm not naive. I don't expect you to report what I'm saying, however important it is. I don't even expect you to tell your editors or tell your newspaper, but I'm going to, man to man here, or man to man and women, I'm going to tell you exactly how it looks from Moscow's perspective. It's only a few minutes, and I'll stop it when I think we've seen enough, or if Vanessa comes on, we can stop it right away. Can we roll that short segment?
Теперь по поводу ПРО. Послушайте, вот здесь все очень взрослые люди и уже опытные. Мы с вами, я сейчас не буду просить, чтобы вы это все, вот так, как я скажу, отражали в своих материалах, влияли на прессу там, или как. Я просто вам, вот знаете, хочу вам лично сказать, напомнить какие-то вещи. Ведь мир избавлен от крупномасштабных войн и военных конфликтов. Мы с вами все об этом знаем. Благодаря так называемому стратегическому балансу, который был достигнут после того, как две суперядерные державы договорились фактически о сдерживании и в росте наступательных вооружений, и о сдерживании в системах противоракетной обороны. Потому что для всех понятно, если одна сторона развивает противоракетную оборону успешнее, чем вторая, то она приобретает преимущество, и у нее появляется искушение использовать это оружие первой. Поэтому это один из краеугольных камней международной безопасности. Система противоракетной обороны и договоренности в этой сфере. Я далек от того, чтобы кого-то ругать, обвинять в чем-то. Но когда наши партнеры американские вышли в одностороннем порядке, они нанесли колоссальный удар, или вот это был первый удар по международной стабильности с точки зрения возможности нарушения баланса сил стратегического. Тогда я сказал, ну, мы сейчас не можем развивать эти технологии, поскольку, дорого, во-вторых, еще неизвестно, как они будут работать. Мы не будем просто деньги палить. Мы пойдем по другому пути, мы будем совершенствовать ударные системы, чтобы сохранить баланс. Только для этого. не для того, чтобы угрожать кому-то. Нам ответили, ну да, это вот наша система ПРО не против вас, а то, что вы делаете, мы исходим из того, что это не против нас. Ну и делайте, что хотите. Я думаю, что вот такая постановка вопроса, она связана с тем, я уже говорил, по-моему, сегодня на пленарном заседании, связана была с тем, что это же начало 2000-х годов, Россия находилась в очень сложном положении. Развал экономики, значит, фактически гражданская война и борьба с терроризмом на Кавказе, оборонная промышленность в развале, вооруженные силы в ужасном состоянии. Ну, кому в голову приходилось, что Россия сможет наращивать стратегические вооружения? Наверное, думали о том, что пройдет некоторое время, имеющиеся, доставшиеся от Советского Союза вооружения будут деградировать. Поэтому сказать, да делайте, что хотите. Но мы предупреждали, что мы будем это делать. Мы сказали об этом. И мы делаем. И я вас уверяю, сегодня Россия добилась существенных успехов на этом пути. Я сейчас не буду всего перечислять, но мы модернизировали наши комплексы. И успешно развиваем новые поколения. Я уже не говорю о системах преодоления, системы противоракетной обороны. Но наши партнеры, несмотря на все наши возражения, на все наши предложения о реальном сотрудничестве, не хотят с нами сотрудничать, отвергают все наши предложения и действуют по своему плану. Я сейчас не буду, некоторые вещи считаю даже пока некорректным говорить публично. Но вы можете мне верить, можете не верить. Мы предлагали конкретные элементы, конкретный вариант сотрудничества. Они реально все были отклонены. Но вот все-таки пришли к тому, что сейчас построили систему ПРО в Румынии. Говорили это все время о чем? Нам нужно защититься от иранской ядерной угрозы. Где ядерная угроза иранская? Ее нет? Договор подписали уже. И причем Соединенные Штаты были, по сути, инициаторами этого договора с Ираном. Мы помогли, мы поддержали. Но если бы не позиция США, не было бы этого договора. И это, безусловно, заслуга президента Обамы. Потому что я считаю, это договор правильный, он разрядил ситуацию вокруг Ирана. И президент Обама может записать это, безусловно, в свой послужной список как результат своей работы на этом направлении. Но угрозы нет, а система ПРО продолжает строиться. Значит, мы были правы, когда говорили, что нас обманывают, с нами неискренне, ссылаясь на якобы имеющуюся иранскую ядерную угрозу при строительстве системы ПРО. Ну так оно и есть на самом деле. В очередной раз пытались нас надуть. Сейчас построили эту систему, сейчас ставят там ракеты. Так? Но вам должно быть известно, что ракеты эти закладываются в капсулу, которая используется для пусков ракет средней дальности «Томагавк» морского базирования. Значит, туда закладывают сейчас антиракеты, способные поражать цели на расстоянии 500 километров.
Dennis, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. I was muted. That's what happened. Yeah, okay, fine. Ray, we wanted to stop it at that point because we have other speakers, and also because I think the point is very clearly made. We can always return to that if there is more to be said. Let me again just tell everybody that this is the 80th meeting of the International Peace Coalition. We're going to go to Mr. Haim Rashid. He's an author, professor, founder of the Jewish Network for Palestine. He's had the dubious honor of being arrested a few times for his protests. We're happy to have him here with us, and you have the floor, sir. Are you unmuted?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm very honored to be on this panel and on this institution. I will read my talk to keep to time. I was asked to briefly refer to my recent arrest by the Metropolitan Police on charges under the Terror Act 2000, Section 12, which carry a penalty of 14 years in jail. I was not the first to face this. A number of human rights activists, as well as journalists in Britain, were arrested under the same act since Keir Starmer came to power. Starmer is married to a Jewish Zionist woman and is a strong supporter of Israel. He continues to send arms to Israel. Since his election, he has refused to call Israel an apartheid state and disagreed with the ICC and ICJ and Amnesty International and the UN, who have determined that Israel war crimes in Gaza encompass genocide. He continues to do so. Now, the Tory government of the last 14 years also supported Israel, but did not use the Terror Act in the same manner. Keir Starmer used to be a human rights lawyer, would you believe it, and director of public prosecutions for many years. And he was responsible for the judicial system. He has proven his support for Israel on many occasions in the past, and now is acting illegally against freedom of speech. And how does he do that? The number of activists, journalists, and ex-diplomats now arrested or detained is really striking. One of the journalists, Sarah Wilkinson, was arrested at home by 20 balaclavaed officers, and her whole place was turned upside down and took about 3 weeks to put together again. She was taken handcuffed to a police station and charged with terrorism. Two leading Jewish colleagues of mine, Tony Greenstein and Natalie Strecker, are now facing court hearings next week. Some other journalists, including Richard Mudhurst and Asa Winstanley, face similar charges. The number is close to 100 now. What did all these supporters of international law, including myself, do to deserve this? They reported apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, all severe crimes under international law. Furthermore, the human rights conventions which codify these crimes require us all to act against such crimes, to prevent them, and submit evidence to ICC, ICJ, and the UN if we have it. We were all prosecuted for upholding international law, reporting Israeli crimes. In order to silence, intimidate, and punish us, the Terror Act 2000 is misused, bringing the legal system into disrepute, undermining the function and the meaning of the act. In my case, the accusations were so clearly ridiculous that the charges were dropped after 4 days, a record. In other cases, the accused are called to numerous police and court hearings, clearly a misuse of police and court powers. The support of international law and the rights of the Palestinians, affirmed by numerous legal international agencies such as the UN, is now a terror crime in Starmer's Britain. The same applies to speaking on events in Lebanon and Syria, of course. I'm saying this as an Israeli Jew living in Britain for decades, and I'm, together with many other left-wing Jews, arrested for speaking out. Mainstream journalists are in no such danger. They are carefully policed by their bosses on behalf of the administration, prevented from using such terms altogether. Britain has become a dystopian society, a modern version of the Orwellian traditions of the Soviet Union. The pretense of freedom of speech is just that, a pretense. This must be the nadir of current Britain, but likely to worsen further. Across the British public sphere, a great silence has descended, a season of fear and complicity, which you have been denied in the US. Nowhere in Britain could a figure like Judge Napolitano speak truth to power and give space for critical voices, some of which have been on this panel, of course. The second point I wish to share with you is the fact that to be a conformist Jew in the West has become an untenable position, one I cannot accept in any way. the unquestioning, indeed, the fervent and enthusiastic support that organized Jewry offers Israel is a spectacle unknown in Jewish history of the last 2 millennia. The support by Israeli Jews of the genocide is an unpardonable blot on Jewish history. 97%, according to a Tel Aviv University poll in March. For Jews elsewhere to act in this manner is even worse. But should Jews be held to higher standards than the Western governments? After all, this is now the West against the rest. And why should they be different? Well, I want to say that, yes, they should be. Jews have suffered the worst genocide last century. They are personally involved. My whole family was destroyed by the Nazis in Poland, both my parents being the sole survivors, also surviving Auschwitz. Does it make any sense for such people to fervently support apartheid and genocide? Is it even possible to encompass such a contradictory notion in the same person? The only way to understand this reaction of most Jews, I mean Zionist Jews, and not only Jews, Zionists elsewhere, is as a deep disturbance, a cognitive dissonance resulting from unresolved traumas of the Holocaust and the replacement of Judaism by Zionism, a militarized settler colonialism. By doing so, Jews are assisting the rise of anti-Semitism across the globe by claiming their positions as quintessentially Jewish, a false and damaging claim, one which we, Jews supporting Palestine and international law, are rejecting out of hand as human being, as Jews, and in my case, as an Israeli. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very, very much for your remarks, sir. And I think we're going to, so everyone knows, be going to, in a moment, a more extended discussion involving our speakers. Let me also just indicate, I believe I'll go for a moment to Ray McGovern, who says he had something he wanted to either add or respond to with respect to what was just said.
Yes, unfortunately, I had to leave for a moment. This will only take another minute, but I thought we needed to draw conclusions from what we saw Putin say there. They were faced with a decision. What are they going to do? The U.S. will not listen, okay? So do we build ABM things? Well, they don't work. We're not sure they work, okay? And they're incredibly expensive, so we're not going to burn our money, says Putin. We're going to work on other very sophisticated things. I could tell you, but I'm not going to tell you the details of this, okay? But they're very effective, okay? Now, what's he saying? He's saying we're going to work on the Oreshnik, a game changer, okay? That was 8 years ago. Takes about 8 years to develop something like this. So all I'm saying here is that we wouldn't listen. The U.S. wouldn't listen. They didn't. The journalists never reported anything. You haven't seen this before, right? And 2 years later, of course, in the State of the Nation address, Putin did a show and tell with big screens showing what some of these new missiles, like the one that goes around the South Pole, could do. So bottom line here is the Russians have used the time that we spent building F-35s and ABMs that doesn't work, developing game-changing missiles. And the problem is that our current administration doesn't believe it a game changer. Looks like Trump maybe believed them. So that's all I wanted to say to wrap up that segment. Thank you for letting me show that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ray. And again, as everyone can tell, we're dealing with a couple of technical matters concerning Vanessa Beeley. We hope to have her here. She's still trying to get on. I'd like to, we have one video presentation, and otherwise, I'd like to know if Helga has something. I'm not sure she's with us at the moment. So, oh, you are there. Okay. Would you like to say anything in response to what you've heard so far before we go to the
yeah, only briefly. I think it is really very important what the implication is of this video, which Ray was showing us, because I remember that in the entire period of the moving of the ABM system into Poland and Romania, the Aegis system, there were several security conferences in Moscow where the Russians were showing animations, totally discrediting the idea that this could be against so-called Iranian missiles, which did not make any sense because Russia even had offered some of their Russian sites in the south of Russia, or I think even in some of the former Soviet republics, which would have been in very clear close by Iran. And if the aim really would have been that this was to deter Iranian missiles, the West should have taken that offer because it would have been much more sensible. The fact that they did not even consider that, but kept building the ABM system and the Aegis system, including, some in the Ibero Peninsula. And the Russians continuously said that they will not and cannot allow that system to go into phase 3 and 4, and that they would do something to dismantle it before. I think the entire period, the West has been absolutely unwilling and even totally arrogant in, just thinking that they could dismiss that, while they should have really listened to my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, who was very much making the point of, that in the arms race, the question of making the other weapon technologically obsolete is always going to be a factor, as it was with the SDI. So I think that, the idea, and I think what is very interesting is that the Russians go for a non-linear response while the West remains in a sort of linear response. I think that points to the mistaken axioms of thinking, which all these strategists always would dismiss. But, it's of one piece if you have a financial system which doesn't work because you put all your eggs on profit maximization, or if you think in a linear way on, in military matters, or if you stick to British kind of geopolitics, it's all based on the same axiomatic mistaken basis coming from the long line going back to Aristotle into the English Enlightenment, while the system, obviously, which the Russians are basing their entire logic on is I would say Leibnizian, and the influence of Nikolaus Kusansky and similar thinkers. That is a dimension of this strategic discussion which is completely lacking, but I think it would be very useful to eventually entertain.
Yeah, I think at this point what we'll do is I'll turn this over to Dennis Small as a co-moderator, and we'll go to sort of a combination of questions and then other offerings. I understand also that Steve Starr is on, so he's available to bring into the to interpolate into the discussion. So I just wanted to do that. So Dennis?
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Let me remind people that you can raise your hand, your digital hand, by clicking on the icon. If you have a question, a comment, we'd like them to be limited to 3 minutes. You can address them to any one of the speakers in particular, or make it a broad comment or question for others. I guess this is the point as well. We'll get to that in a minute, Dave. Thanks for reminding. We'll do that, but I think this is the point at which we'll also, those of you who are watching over YouTube, if you want to participate in the dialogue part of this, you will have to get on the Zoom link. You'll have to register. Please click on the appropriate button. to do that because the live transmission portion of this will end. So I would like to, and we will have a very short video from Chandra Musafar of the Just Organization, peace organization, which we'll be showing in a moment. But I would like people to start getting in the queue to raise questions and get the discussion going on this. While that's happening, I'd like to just add 2 updates to what has been discussed and what Ray was talking about, in particular from the comments from President-elect Trump, where he said that the use of the ATACMS against Russia was completely crazy and insane. These were comments which he made back on November 25th, however, which were just published by Time magazine. And in addition to what Ray told us about, one other thing that was said by Trump is the following, quote, "But I would imagine people are waiting until I get in before anything happens. I would imagine. I think that would be a very smart thing to do that." Now, today, we also got a response from the Kremlin to Trump's statements that Ray had gone through. This is from Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman. He said that Trump's remarks were in line with, quote, "our vision of the causes of escalation. It appeals to us," Peskov said. "It is obvious that Trump understands exactly what is escalating the situation." So you can see that there is a dialogue going on, underway, around the immediate extreme danger of thermonuclear exchange. And I think that's very, very important, especially since, in addition to the ATACMS, you have, as Helga was insisting, voices such as Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan explicitly arguing the conditions under which a nuclear war is in fact thinkable. The idea is to get Americans to think the unthinkable, I guess. And there has been follow-up coverage in Newsweek magazine and so on to kind of make it, the kind of thing you discuss around the family kitchen table. Gee, what would nuclear war look like? So with that said, I have a number of people who have raised their hands. Let me just respond briefly to Chaim Gresheth as well. Very much appreciate your remarks and your valor in your standing up, even if you're a lone voice. That's okay. That's what's needed sometimes. It's not okay what they're doing to you, but we in the LaRouche movement have also been victimized by that kind of treatment, and not only threats of jail, but in the case of Mr. LaRouche, he went to jail for 5 years. I guess it's true that things are even worse in the UK than in the United States in terms of this attacks on freedom of speech. I'll take you at your word. It certainly seems to be the case. However, let's not forget the case of Scott Ritter. Let's not forget the case of Dimitri Simes, who are currently being subjected to the same thing. And most significantly, going back to the LaRouche case back at the end of the 1980s, who was attacked, slandered, jailed for presenting solutions to the crisis which we now find ourselves in. So we're very familiar with this. We thank you for what you do. We thank you for your comments as well. And I have to say that as an American Jew, I'm horrified beyond words with what is being done in the name of Judaism, which, as you noted, is not Judaism, but Zionism. So it's particularly important that voices such as yours are heard, and heard loud and clear as far as that can happen. So now let me go into the questions. There is